So this video is going to briefly go over some of the skills that you need in AP Chemistry. Now, when we say skills, we're talking about math skills here. We're not talking about lab skills or anything like that. We're talking about here are the mathematical skills. So using scientific figures or significant figures, scientific notation, and mental math are the big ones. Okay, so significant figures or sig figs. So the general idea behind significant figures is that not all numbers matter, which is kind of contrary to what we've usually thought about. Usually we think about all numbers are important, but that's really not true. And this stems from what you can measure. Okay, so if you think about what you measure in lab, if you have a ruler that can only measure 1 inch at a time or 1 centimeter at a time, you're not going to be able to accurately measure to the 1,000th of a centimeter or 1,000th of an inch using that scale. Okay, so all of this comes from measurement, and we're going to do some specific practice with significant figures and measurement and how we read those, but it also comes into play with calculations. Okay, so all non-zero digits are significant, okay? 1 through 9, all considered significant, means we count them. Zeros are where it gets a little bit challenging because it depends on where the decimal is placed. Okay, so if we look at our first number, 210, there's no decimal, so that 0 is not significant. No decimal, 0 is not significant. Okay, so that means that there are 2 significant figures, the 2 and the 1. 0 is not significant. If we look at the next one, 210 point, okay, even though there's nothing after the decimal, that decimal makes that 0 significant. Okay, so now we have 3, 2, 1, and 0. That decimal does make it significant. No decimal, not significant. Decimal does make it significant. Anything following that decimal, any zeros after, are also considered significant. So our next one, 210.0, is actually, that 0 at the end is significant. That has 4 significant figures. Now, I know you're probably thinking that is all the exact same number. Why does it matter? Because it tells us about our measurement. Okay, if I'm looking at this first number, 210, means the only numbers I know for sure are the 2 and the 1. Okay, so the 2 and the 10. I know 200 and then I know 10 more. That's it. If I know this decimal here and there's nothing after it, I know the 2, the 1, and the 0. And I'm confident in those. If I know all of these have 2, 1, 0, and 0. Okay, so it tells me about my measurement. Now, what about decimals that have zeros before and after? So numbers less than 1. Okay, this is probably going to make you uncomfortable. But these zeros, these leading zeros, are not significant. They are placeholders, okay? And that probably makes you cringe a little bit because you're going, wait, there's a big difference between 21, 210.0021, and yeah, I know, there's a big difference, okay? But those zeros are considered placeholders. They just tell you the magnitude of the number, not anything about the measurement. So this also only has 2 significant figures. This one, similar to our rule up here, anything after the decimal place is considered significant. That means this first one is not, this one is not, this one is not, 2 is significant, 1 is significant, the 0 is significant. So this one has 3 significant figures. This one has 2, this one has 3. Okay, and then the last one is what happens when you have zeros sandwiched in between numbers. They are significant. They count. Okay, so this one has 4. So if we go back and look at these just so that you have for your reference, this first number, 210, has 2 significant figures. 210 point has 3 significant figures. 210.0 has 4 significant figures. Down here, 0.0021 has 2 significant figures. 0.00210 has 3 significant figures. And then our last one, 2201, has 4 significant figures. Now, why does this matter? When you're doing calculations, your final answer will have the same number of sig figs as the value with the least sig figs in the problem, okay? So you're limited by your least number of significant figures. So that means when you get a number out of your calculator and you're going to round, you're gonna round to the appropriate number of significant figures. That appropriate number is the least amount of significant figures anywhere in the problem. Okay, so if you have a number that has 4 and you have a number that has 1, your final answer gets rounded to 1 significant figure. Okay, and there are going to be cases where it's going to make you a little uncomfortable to round that much, but those are the rules, and those are the ones that we're going to follow. AP will ask questions specifically trying to get you to look at the number of significant figures, so it's important that we practice this early on. I will admit this is not something that I am awesome at. So please, please, please call me out if I screw them up. Next skill, scientific notation. So we use scientific notation to write really big or really small numbers in a lot more concise way. Okay, so we can eliminate all those trailing zeros at the end. We can eliminate all the front zeros that are placeholder zeros if we use scientific notation. Okay, so scientific notation is always going to have a number between 1 and 10 multiplied by 10 to some sort of power. Okay, so A is your number, so we could say 1.2, it can be a decimal, 1.23, can have multiple places. Okay, then times 10, and then the exponent is going to be a positive number if it's for numbers greater than 1. Okay, so if it's not a decimal, it's going to be times 10 to the something, times 10 to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, if it's a decimal, it's going to be your number, so 1.2, 1.23, whatever, times 10 to the negative place value. That moves your decimal the other direction. Okay, so if we're looking at our big numbers, so numbers greater than 1, for each magnitude of the exponent up here, you're going to move the decimal place 1 place to the right. Okay, so you're making it bigger if you wanted to expand it out and to write the full number. If you're making it go the other way, if it's negative, you're going to move the decimal place to the left, and then wherever you stop, that's where you put your decimal point, and then you fill in with zeros. That's how you expand it out. So yeah, it's to change between, you're just going to move right or left. Okay, so it's important to be able to know what those numbers are going to mean, how to interpret them. The bigger thing is going to be how to manipulate them. And this is going to come when we do some mental math. Okay, so the multiple choice part of the AP test is no calculator, which means there are things that you're going to have to do in your head, and it's not very fun, but we're going to practice. Okay, so the common things that you are going to need to be able to do on the test, you're going to need to be able to convert fractions into decimals. So you'll want to do some practice with some of your common ones, knowing that 1/3 is 0.33, that 1/2 is 0.5, those sorts of things. We'll get a little bit more complex, but you'll want to know kind of what some of those basics are. And going back and forth, knowing that if something is a decimal, what that would look like as a fraction. How to simplify fractions and exponentials. So if you have things in scientific notation, know when to add the exponents, know when to subtract the exponents. We're going to practice with that. There are a lot of things that we can do by setting things up in a setting up our mathematic steps in a certain way, that we can use some of our fraction and our exponent rules to make the mental math a lot easier. We'll want to get good at estimating using fractions and exponents. This is more of a time thing because there are going to be some problems where AP doesn't actually expect you to be able to calculate it completely out to the every significant figure, especially pertaining to multiple choice. So if you can estimate some things, it's going to speed you along and get you to an answer faster. Okay, because especially if it's multiple choice, you have multiple things to pick from. Those answers oftentimes are going to be different enough that you can do some estimation of fractions to be able to get you to the right answer. And then just some of our basics, knowing how to multiply and divide multiple digits, obviously addition and subtraction, You can write on everything, so you can always doodle off to the side. I have a tendency to doodle out my especially more complex multiplication and division. And then you'll want to have a basic understanding of base 10 logarithms, especially when we get to things like pH, and knowing how to manipulate those sorts of numbers back and forth from a logarithm to a number. So we're going to do practice with all of these so that we get good at it over the course of the year. When you take your actual unit test, we'll do the multiple choice without a calculator. We'll do some quizzes without calculators. And the best way to get good at this is to practice. So that's what we're going to do.